You would think a video that ranks all of the openings in Kingdom Hearts would itself have a lengthy opening that talks about the history of video game intro sequences, if only to pad out the runtime of the video. Number 10. I'm not just putting this last because the mobile games are at the bottom of my personal barrel when it comes to Kingdom Hearts games, but because the back cover intro is truly so bizarre. Not in a trippy, whoa what's happening way, but more so a I can't believe this is what they landed on kind of way. It looks more like a placeholder or a draft for the final version that accidentally got put in the game. Well, I guess game isn't the right word to use there. This is essentially just a small movie that precedes a big movie, but I actually quite like the back cover cutscene collection, and I think it deserved a better opening act than this. It's just hard for me to get excited for the movie when presented with this footage of the browser game except for ants. I'm assuming they couldn't make it look good by scaling it to fit the whole screen, but maybe there was a better answer than just having a miniature screening of it in the middle while expository text floats around a black void. And they didn't even muster up enough expository text to last the entire intro. It actually repeats like 3 times. It's hard enough to read it all given the different sizes and fonts and positions of the text, so it was probably better off stretched out to fit that entire runtime. I appreciate the effort to work in the actual cage key content into back cover here, but there had to have been a better way. Like, a way that costs more than $10. Like, thematically and chronologically, it makes sense to have this stuff preceding back cover, but it feels totally out of place when it's followed by a fully 3D movie in the Unreal Engine. I don't know, they already shelled out the money to make this whole movie. They couldn't have just animated like 2 minutes of important moments from the browser game. I will say the highlight here is this rendition of Dearly Beloved, which is always a joy to hear, although unceremoniously cut off when the intro just decides to be over. It's the longest 2.5 minutes of my life, and I've played Swim this way before. Number 9. We have to work through a couple more budget intros, or at least that's how I'm categorizing them in my head. By that I mean, these next few are all just pieces of footage from previous games set to music from previous intros, almost none of which I can play if we want to retain the luxury of this video having any audio in it. For the number 9 slot, I'm picking Recom, if only for starting the trend of recycling old stuff. I mean, that applies in the macro sense as well. Like, if you've watched any video on this channel, you know that I'm complete Cage 1 trash, but I don't need to experience the game over and over except a little worse each time. But I actually really like Recom for what it is, and I think it also got the short end of the Beast Castle stick when it comes to its opening. It's the most bare-bones cinematic recap of Cage 1 set to simple and clean, which we'll be hearing a lot today. It's also kind of crowded up with all the credit text, which is used during the openings for other games, but it feels most intrusive here and takes up a good amount of space. There are some interesting choices for the clips here though. All the Disney stuff is kind of mishmashed into a random order, like Neverland stuff before Agrabah stuff, but that's not really a big deal because so much of it is pretty much interchangeable in the actual game and always gets glossed over in a recap. But when it gets to all of the endgame stuff, it becomes almost strictly chronological, except for this little sequence of Sora finding Hikari in the Grand Hall, then deflecting the big Xemnas energy attack in Castle Chapel, and then Riku Ansem stabbing Maleficent, which obviously is not the order it happened in, and it's also interesting that they threw the Xemnas part in the middle of all of that, when in reality you can't do the unknown fight until you visit End of the World for the first time. I don't know if it was a mistake or if they just really wanted that admittedly really cool guard move from Sora in there. But yeah, overall, it's pretty forgettable, but it does its job of dropping you off right where the story picks back up in the grassy field outside Castle Oblivion. It's basically just a clip show, which brings us to number 8, the Recoded opening, which is not pretty much the same thing. Coincidentally, this intro starts by showing the Pinky Promise at the end of Sora's story in Recom, which sets up the whole Thank Naminé journal stuff that kicks off the game's plot. Also, Sora's big Minecraft fingers are deeply disturbing. This is still just a clip show, but with a little more oomph and intrigue behind it. They threw in some very brief shots of TVA and the Sea Salt Trio, but kinda garbled and obscured by glitch effects. Since the point of Recoded is unveiling this secret message about all of these other characters who are in peril and need rescuing, I think it's pretty cool to have that visually represented here in the intro. That's pretty much all there is to say on it though. It's another simple and clean recap, but this time it's Cage 1 as well as Chain of Memories and 2. Maybe because of these 2 other games being included, I find the pacing to be a lot snappier and it flows with the song a bit better than the Recom intro. The other main thing that sticks out here is this little data effect that's overlaid on part of the footage, which looks like numbers and alphabet soup flying from the middle of the screen. It's like only there for the end of the Cage 1 clips and the start of the Recom clips, and then it just sort of stops for the Cage 2 footage. Maybe that's supposed to be indicative of the Cage 1 and Com stuff being the only parts of the journey that we're exploring in the digital world, or maybe they were looking at it and thought, this is going on for too long and doesn't look that good. I mean, Data Naminé is like the crux of the whole game, and the data swirl ends right after she's on screen, so I'd like to think it's intentional. I also wanted to point out this weird sequence here. So you got Maleficent doing her half-sacrifice in Hollow Bastion in Cage 2, and then it cuts to Axel dying in the Betwixt and Between area. If you weren't paying complete attention and for some reason hadn't played Cage 2 before this, it might be mistaken as Sora, like, mourning the loss of Maleficent, if only for the consistent black and green coloring in both of their pseudo-death scenes. I don't know if they were trying to actually draw attention to the two sort of sacrificial moves that were made in Sora's favor during that game, or if it was just a cool editing choice, but I wanted to highlight that. I guess they also wanted to make sure that they showed Maleficent and Pete in the recap a few times, since this will be, like, the last time they're ever even sort of relevant to what's going on in a game. Moving on to number 7. And speaking of number 7, if he had a heart, this would be where he dies of sadness, because here is where I'm slotting in the intro for 358 Days Over 2. I still categorize this as a great value, bargain bin, yard sale, hand-me-down sort of intro, but it's my favorite of that type. It starts off in Where Nothing Gathers, which was a great sign given that this is where some of the best scenes and conversations from Cage 2 took place, and Saïx continues that Cage 2 thread with the callback speech he gives in Sora's general direction after the Battle of 1000 Heartless. And again, not that anyone should play this game before Cage 2, although I'm sure some people down there in the comments have because they had a DS and not a PlayStation the second, but what a fucking rallying cry. Like, Saïx kicks the game off with this call to action, and if you're a blank slate like Roxas approaching these 358 days ahead of you, you might be inclined to believe that you're really on this meaningful and deeply consequential crusade to get yourself and your coworkers' hearts to call your own. Then we get this nice little scene of Roxas kind of contemplating the notion of nobody's having hearts alongside Axel, and then what happens next is best described as a reality TV show intro sequence. Here's Xemnas, he's the bossy bitch. This is Zexion, he was cast to be the shy nerd. Lexius is the buff hunky dude with washboard abs. Here's Larxene, she's girl. And I honestly just love this. Like, this is the organization game, this is our cast of characters, so give them all their little moment to shine and have their number and title and LinkedIn bio, especially since they're gonna kill off half of them like 2 hours into the game. Enjoy your stipend as you sip margaritas in Ponderosa, Vexen, you're still in the intro. You have the credit text floating around on the remix version, but it's at least a different font and color than the Organization 13 stuff, so it's not that distracting. The roll call fittingly ends with a big extended Roxas sequence showing his name origin and creepy hooded Xemnas. Like, is it just me, or is this a completely separate and 10 times creepier man than the Xemnas we usually see? Then you have Axel giving himself brain freeze from biting into a popsicle, and just saying that makes me physically cringe, and you bookend the conversation he had with Roxas at the beginning of the intro. Again, for something that's basically an Organization 13 AMV, I actually have a soft spot for it. I also appreciate that the existence, or rather non-existence, of Xion isn't spoiled or even hinted at by the intro, because imagine going into the game and just having your foundations rocked by the inclusion of a 14th Organization member. Like, holy shit, I had no idea Nomura looked at DeviantArt OCs and read fanfiction for plot ideas. Of course, I had some idea that this game would turn Organization 13 into something of a misnomer, but still, as usual, I can only speculate what my reaction would have been had I avoided pre-release information. Also, I guess I buried a lead here, but we have Sanctuary playing for this sequence, and it's the only time we get it outside of Cage 2. It's a welcome shakeup since everything seems to default to Simple and Clean unless it's a numbered title. And don't get me wrong, Simple and Clean is my favorite, but for me there's a bit of fatigue from it after a while. Speaking of, number 6. Now, this might seem like sacrilege, especially coming from me, but I don't think I can put the intro for the original Kingdom Hearts any higher. And this isn't to diminish how iconic it is, how it just pulled me in back in 2002, or how it established a lasting trend of characters falling through the sky or the ocean or whatever. I just think it's comparatively kind of bare bones when stacked up against everything I have ranked above it. And maybe that's unfair considering this is the original, though I still think even today it looks good and feels impactful, like here's my dad seeing it for what might as well be the first time. It's the first of many Simple and Cleans we'd be hearing for the next 19 years, and god, it cannot be overstated how hype this song got me and how it was just unlike anything I'd ever heard. Granted, I was 6 years old, and the music rotation for my CD Walkman around the time was like the Pokemon First movie soundtrack, Aaron Carter's Greatest Hits album, and like Kidz Bop, but still. And no, I'm not proud of those last two, I'm just trying to be honest with you. All I wanted was a way to get Simple and Clean into that rotation, and I'm sure I could have managed it somehow, but I was a dumb little baby. And like typically, if you wanted to listen to a song back in the day, you either had to hear it on the radio or buy the whole fucking album, and I wasn't gonna do that. I also remember trying to piece some sort of narrative through line together between the song and the game, and I poured through the lyrics in the manual. Then I realized the song can't possibly have anything to do with Kingdom Hearts itself because it references a father, and Kingdom Hearts hates parents. But regarding the visuals, for the longest time the intro had been immortalized in my head as like this super zany and trippy dream sequence, and while it's certainly still a bit out there, it's not as fast-paced or filled to the brim as most of its successors. That's obviously in large part due to it being the first and having no game or 6 games to quickly summarize summarize. It has no established material to work with and focuses solely on Sora, Riku, and Kairi taking place entirely on the Destiny Island seashore. If anything, it serves as a pretty immediate dose of foreshadowing, what with Riku standing in the water like some sort of ocean siren and trying to lure Sora in, which obviously calls forward to a similar looking scene when Riku falls into darkness during the apocalypse. If we want to keep the comparisons going here, if we consider the big tidal wave to be the stand-in for darkness here, then we see Riku get washed up in it, which checks out, and then Sora soon follows, as he will in the game proper when he gives up his own heart and becomes a Heartless. He's sinking into the abyss, but then he resurfaces, and whose voice does he hear calling out to him from the beach as that happens?
But then I heard a voice. Your voice. You brought me back.
And then they both see another Sora falling through the sky, and fuck if I know what that's supposed to mean. Remember when that was just the wackiest thing? Wow, a second Sora, what a concept. Step it up, KH1, we have an entire micronation worth of Soras now. Literally all of us are Sora, okay? Grow up. Well, actually, I guess we're all, you know... Yeah, let's not get into that. I don't have the energy for that right now. But yeah, maybe this falling Sora represents Roxas. Actually, you know what? No, it's Yozora. There, KH Theory. I'll take my millions of views now, thank you. Leave a tip. And then Sora and Kairi are separated again, so look at that. They basically showed you the whole game here, just cutting out the Disney stuff, as is tradition. I'd also be remiss not to mention the quote that kicks this whole thing off, which will later be used to explain that this entire thing was just one big dream. I mean, they brought it back in Remind, I'm just bracing myself. Sora's really at home eating dinner right now, always has been. But let's move away from that bad timeline and move on to... Number 5. The intro for Birth by Sleep, which I pretty much consider a flashier upgrade to the KH1 intro down to the same version of the same song and the foreshadowing elements. Well, shadowing might be underselling it a bit, it literally shows you clips from the final sequence of the game, but then again so did the KH2 secret ending. It starts off intercutting that with TVA sitting in Land of Departure, and then it hits you'll be playing as the guy who kicked your ass for 90 hours inside the Disney Castle wormhole. This intro is pretty cool in that it really does feel like each of TVA is the mainest of the main characters at different points throughout it. It feels pretty Terra-centric with this opening shot, but then it feels a lot more Aqua-focused during the middle, and it's all about Ven by the time the song's over. In addition to the aforementioned scenes from the KH2 secret ending, we also have beefed up and prettier looking renditions of stuff from the early game, like Terra and Aqua's duel during the Mark of Mastery exam, and the arrival of Xehanort and Vanitas from Ven's point of view. There's also these scenes of Ven running away in like a big film reel hallway, and it looks like Terra is in Castle Oblivion for some reason, I think. Of all the three characters, it kind of makes the least sense for him to be there, so that's something I never really got. But Terra is running away from a big darkness wave, which makes plenty sense, and it kinda looks like Ven is running away from some sort of quickly approaching firewall. Although maybe, since those running sequences are obviously mirroring each other, that fire is better interpreted as light. Terra is a being with a strong darkness who's pursued by Master Xehanort, and Ven is a being with a strong light who's, you know, almost murdered by Master Ericus. Maybe a stretch there, but that's how I'd like to think of it. There's a handful of other cool moments and details here, like Vanitas mimicking the Riku reach from the KH1 opening with Ven in place of Sora. Also, something that's always struck me is the look on Aqua's face here when Terra passes by. Like, what the fuck did you just say to her, you monster? She looks like you just drowned her goldfish. Then there's something that I honestly never noticed or put together until watching the intros for this project, but this whole thing with the wayfinders and the different stations from Sora's dive to the heart. Okay, so Ven's is green, Aqua's is blue, and Terra's is like reddish-orange. They all fly up into the air and then turn into some Princess of Heart stations from KH1. The Snow White one, which is green, the Cinderella one, which is blue, and the Aurora one, which is reddish-orange. And those princesses correspond with the first Disney World that the owner of that wayfinder visits, and I think that's so cool. I don't know if it's just a happy coincidence that the colors matched up or if they really decided what each person's color would be based on those platforms. I would have to imagine the former, but it's a great detail regardless. The intro ends with Ven turning into a shooting star and landing right smack dab in the middle of little baby Sora's head. I mean, not literally, of course, but he could have ended up anywhere else on screen, and that's where he went, which is indicative of where Ven's heart is going to take refuge as revealed by the end of the game. Overall, it's pretty, it's punchy, and it's prescient, but I've just got a few more that I think do it a bit better, including number 4. For the record, I consider the BBS and KH1 intros as like B+, but these top 4 are all intros that I'd put on my fridge, if my fridge were smart enough to depict animated J-pop music videos on its door. I'm also not really raising an eyebrow if anyone calls any of these their personal favorite, because they all excel in at least one way by my estimation. Despite being in a game that I tend to have less fun playing, I can't deny that the intro to Dream Drop Distance does basically everything right. I think the most striking aspect, and potentially the thing that most helps it stick out in my memory, is the choice to use the instrumental version of Simple and Clean instead of the usual lyrical version. Besides back cover, it's the only one to use an instrumental, and this definitely helps distinguish it and give it a bit more of an individual identity. I think the full orchestra in this version also makes things feel a little heavier than usual, maybe. It's like more climactic in a way, more evident that we're building up to something. I mean, when I first played Dream Drop in 2012, I optimistically saw it as the opening act for KH3, sure to follow in no more than 3 years. And the instrumentation here really imparted this mood that we were closing in on the grand finale of childhood. Now, I was wrong about the time gap, but it still was the last full game experience we'd get before that next chapter. I think the big elephant in the room with this intro, or maybe the little rat in the room, is that this intro is especially affected by whether you're viewing the 3DS original or the 2.8 version. The DS titles also like to make use of the bottom screen and relegate the credit text there, but the Dream Drop opening also employed this little Fantasia Michael silhouette on the touchscreen, which was just painfully charming. They try to work it into the PS4 version in some spots, but having him run around at the bottom just doesn't work as well without that second screen. Like the part at the end where Silhouette Michael jumps up and turns into 3D anime Michael, it just looks way cooler when he's leaping from one screen to another. It's just so fun and creative the entire time, especially on the 3DS, from his famous Sorcerer's Apprentice conducting at the very beginning with all the pages, to being swept away by the storm on Destiny Islands, being cloned when Roxas shows up, being surrounded by the fire when Axel appears, reacting to the Xemnas fight and reflecting the lasers. It's, again, incredibly charming. 3DS version also didn't have the credit text right in the middle of the action, which is definitely annoying on the console version, especially when it's covering up some frankly stunning visuals like the Days Trio on the clock tower or the Xemnas fight. But I digress when it comes to the differences between the versions. I love how it opens up with those dark storm clouds, which harkens back to the KH1 intro, since this was, after all, the 10-year anniversary for the series itself when Dream Drop released. The opening is a new and fully animated abridged depiction of 1, Com, Days, and 2, and is kind of unique in that it basically just shows you part of the end of KH3 as well. Like, not only is the intro showing us stuff that's yet to happen, but stuff that doesn't even happen yet in the game we're playing. Of course, things end up looking a little differently in the real KH3 that would come 7 years later, but it's pretty much a rough draft of what the final moments in the Keyblade Graveyard are going to look like, especially when you have Sora, Riku, and Michael chasing Xehanort up the cliffside. I had no idea back then that I was looking at something that would be extremely close to canon. I thought it was like an artist's interpretation of what an idea of a sketch of a concept of the final battle might look like, but nope, this is pretty close to the real deal. To wrap back around to the beginning, the actual recap portion begins with this stylized book version of Destiny Islands, and as neat as it looks, I remember being glad that they didn't cheap out and do the entire intro in this Paper Mario style with these static cardboard character pieces. Then it transitions into actual models, and we get this fucking awesome retelling of the Destiny Islands apocalypse, which takes us straight to Castle Oblivion, which does get kinda yada yada, but we've got a lot of games to cover at this point. Then Sora just smashes into the memory pod, and I still get chills from the Roxas part of this intro. Xion and Axel are both trying to kick the shit out of him, and that's intercut with them palling around and playfully shoving each other on top of this multi-story tall clock tower. The friendship was always fraught with danger if you really think about it. And Jesus, the part when Roxas charges at Axel with 2 Keyblades in hand and it smash cuts to Riku and Sora fighting Xemnas at the end of KH2, that is so good. Mind you, this entire time, the choreography, so to speak, has been ridiculously on point. Actions are syncing up with the music and nothing feels out of place or poorly timed. But were they aware that this big swirly thing that everyone makes with their Keyblades looks exactly like a certain summon animation from KH1? I was expecting Simba to show up and just solo Xehanort at the end there. But yeah, this is a high bar to clear, and for me, the next one just barely clears it, which is number 3. Number 3 is number 3. Right off the bat, I want to say that my biggest gripe with the KH3 opening is that it very rarely feels like the visuals and the music are working in tandem. I don't think the song is bad either. I think I ultimately prefer Don't Think Twice over Face My Fears, but the latter definitely works better as an intro song. It's got portions that are a bit faster paced and upbeat. But it takes a while to get going, so I think the early parts of the intro here feel especially jarring when the music is still slower and quieter and not quite ramped up yet. It feels a bit more natural as the song progresses, but never really hits that same degree of synchronization like some of the other intros do. That aside though, it's just a fucking joy to watch. I mean, I think this might be the most emotional intro of the bunch, if only because it's giving us one last reminder of how many characters have had their lives completely ruined by this veiny bastard man. The whole thing is contextualized as the chess match between Xehanort and Ericus that we flash back to in the game, and this is where the intro wins a lot of points with me. It's not a super original metaphor or anything, but I just love the storytelling there. All of these people, whether it's Sora and Riku or Ansem and Xemnas, have just been literal pawns in Xehanort's grand scheme. And make no mistake, it's his game. There's no Ericus in the intro counteracting him. There's no one force that can really measure up to his intellect or years of planning and backup planning. The only thing that's going to take him down is all of the pawns banding together and overthrowing him. And if you were just watching the intro and knew nothing about the games, you might even mistake his young self for an edgy anime protagonist, if not for him eventually morphing into the aforementioned veiny bastard man. He's just a guy acting out fanfiction of his OCs. Oh, wait, nope, he's a war criminal. But yeah, I mostly love this intro because I think it did a really good job at representing basically everything from, for lack of a better term, the story so far. Birth by Sleep was kind of ignored in the Dream Drop opening, even though it was basically just as relevant as the Days stuff, and here we get TVA at the Land of Departure, Terra turning into Terranor, and poor Ven's Station of Awakening breaking into pieces again. That guy should really get that thing insured. I love how he crashes down into Destiny Islands at night and we get this little time-lapse thing as it turns to day, but also to represent how 10 years pass in between. The song starts to pick up when Sora, Riku, and Hikari are shown, and then basically all of KH1, Calm, Days, and 2 happens like vaguely at the same time, because we have Riku turn into Ansem with the chess piece being slammed down by Xehanort, which is so sick, and we see like all the Days stuff before catching back up with Hikari in the secret place at the end of KH1. Also, they really love the Roxas Axel fight. They use it again here and it looks even better this time. But my favorite sequence is the part where all of the characters in need of rescue, and Riku and Lee for some reason, see the door to light open, and what's happening on the other side? Fucking Sora fighting Ansem, Marluxia, and Xemnas all at the same time. I guess that Marluxia appearance is like supposed to summarize all of Calm. Again, we have a lot of games to cover here. All of this is happening on a giant metaphysical chessboard, which by law makes it 10 times cooler. Then we get an interpretation of this game's final confrontation, which is somehow less physically reminiscent of the actual events than the Dream Drop depiction, go figure. And then I guess Sora somehow summons Kingdom Hearts with his Keyblade, I guess. I'm not really sure how he did that, but he and Xehanort both look cool as they stare directly at it. Can we also discuss the evolution of Sora's pre-intro quotes? In KH1 he's just like, man, I keep thinking about crazy shit. In 2 he gives us like a 4-stanza poem, and in 3 it's a fucking Gettysburg Address, like Jesus Christ Sora, we've got a game to get to here, you wanna practice your monologue for theater class some other time? I do like it though, it's kind of foreboding, like maybe this should have set off red flags that everyone was gonna fucking die later on. But in summary, this intro got me so goddamn hyped for a game that, believe it or not, I waited a very long time to play. I guess I'm like a crazy person for saying that the game proper actually lived up to it for me, but that's a video for another day. Let's move on to number 2. And some of you might be counting on your fingers and asking how there are 2 spots left, and I wouldn't blame you if you forgot about the short but sweet 0.2, which despite its length has an intro for the books. And right up front, I think I can credit like 80% of its success to the Ray of Hope remix of Simple and Clean that's used here. I don't even know what it is about it, but the first few notes had me feeling like a kid in 2002 again, probably helped by the fact that the intro opens with Sora, Riku, and Hikari at about the age I was back when I first played KH1. While I really liked the KH3 opening, my primary complaint was that it usually felt like there was a lack of synergy between the music and the visuals, but that's like completely reversed for the 0.2 intro. This remix sounds like blue skies and ocean waves when it needs to, and later it somehow manages to sound like 2 of your friends possessed by evil edgelords trying to stab you. It sounds like Michael the Christ Mouse descending from the heavens and saving the day. It fucking sounds like an adorable triangular hand-holding freefall. This shit here gave me a lot of dopamine back in 2017, by the way. As much as we've heard Simple and Clean by this point, I think it was a perfect choice to use it, but a remixed version of it, since 0.2 is kind of a remix on KH1 itself, changing our perspective and understanding of a handful of events in that game. It also plays back into the whole water equals darkness thing that was most prevalent in the KH1 intro, showing Aqua submerged at both the beginning and the end, representing her time spent in the realm of darkness. And good god, they went and spoiled a little bit of KH3 for us at the end there, if only symbolically. I mean, we knew it was going to happen one way or another, but that ending shot of Aqua reaching for Sora's hand and the cut right before they actually connect, that's just so good. Just 2 more years, Aqua. Conceptually, it really is just a Birth by Sleep recap, but goddamn is it just outright gorgeous. I remember my jaw dropping from how good this looked, and it still looks good, obviously, but I was not prepared for Kingdom Hearts to look like this. I figured the whole thing is basically just Aqua replaying the events of BBS in her head, since it starts with her already alone and underwater, and it's cool to be walked through this amped up depiction of Birth by Sleep entirely from Aqua's perspective. We get to watch the friendship degrade all over again, culminating in this awesome clash between Aqua and Terra Xehanort and Ventus Vanitas. And then, Michael shows up to help or whatever. And then I guess the next part is just Aqua fantasizing about things being not awful and being back with her friends, because that's interrupted by the harsh reality of Baldy Bastard Man showing up with his gross spidery fingers and his galaxy ball, dunking them all into water and ruining their weekends. At this point, we're pretty much back where we left off in BBS, with Aqua sacrificing herself to keep Terra and Ven safe, and her stranded alone 20,000 leagues under the sea. Despite its high placement, I don't even really have that much else to say about it because, again, so much of it hinges on the music here, which I unfortunately can't really play. And despite not being as full of a series recap as the Dream Drop opener, I think this intro had me even more excited for the future of the series, especially if it was going to look and sound as good as this. With that, we've finally arrived at number 1. God damn it, it's finally happened. Can it really be? Do I have, on the regular Pat channel on YouTube.commercial, Kingdom Hearts number 2 at the top of a list? Your eyes and ears do not deceive you. The opening for KH2 is fucking perfection. I honestly don't even know where to begin with it. I would just watch this over and over as a kid on the PS2, and I found myself still completely enamored by it as I rewatched it for this project. I think the biggest selling point here has to be how in sync Sanctuary is with the visuals. Like, it's pretty much unparalleled. Even Naminé and Kairi know the words to it. Where did they learn that? I remember that totally catching me off guard the first time. But it's not even that, it's also stuff like the tide receding or Riku turning into Ansem during the backwards vocals, Sora landing in Rising Falls, Sora defeating Ansem at the end of the first hook, the entire Castle Oblivion part. Jesus Christ, there is nothing cooler than the Castle Oblivion part. I still get goosebumps from it 15 years later. Sora, Donald, and Goofy fighting their way up the castle during the backwards bridge with the guitar, it just doesn't get any better than that. That's capped off with the sequence without any vocals where Sora and Riku simultaneously fight Marluxia and Ansem, ending with Marluxia just scything you in the fucking face. It's cool to see Chain of Memories be covered in a substantial way in one of these intros, and that might be another reason why I think the KH2 one is so successful. There's only 2 games to cover, and there's still some space to color outside the lines and include stuff that purely sets up KH2, like showing Kairi getting older or the Roxas stuff at the end. Everything feels like it gets its time in the spotlight. It's fast-paced and snappy, but everything still has room to breathe. For all of the quick and action-packed parts like the aforementioned calm fights or running up Rising Falls, there are slower and more emotional moments like the ending of KH1 or Kairi on the beach. Some of the visuals are just wild too, like Riku and Kairi turning into Thanos dust at the beginning here, or Riku's face here. There are some obvious but great callbacks too, like you gotta have another Riku reaching out moment, as well as Roxas mimicking Sora landing in the Station of Awakening with the doves at the very end. Of course, KH2 continues the trend of Sora's opening and cryptic lines, and when I first heard it, I had no idea who was talking. Bear in mind, Recom didn't release until after KH2, so I was not ready for post-pubescent Haley Joel Osment. I was like, who the hell is talking right now? Is that BHK from the box art? I also always thought it was funny how they kind of reframe the ending of Calm as something that happened against Sora's will. Like, he just shows up and then Naminé draws the egg pod thing and he gets trapped in it, and he doesn't look like it was something he agreed to. And then she mouths more words from the song, like, Jesus, Naminé is too powerful. Also, Heartless being in the Rising Falls is fake news, but I'm okay with these kinds of artistic liberties being taken. By the way, I've mentioned in a past video how nothing hits harder than that first when from Simple and Clean when Sora and Kairi's hands break apart at the end of KH1, but I think this moment right here is a strong contender. Sora, Riku, and Kairi are laying on the seashore, and then the music just punches you in the face as Roxas slams through the sand and falls into the dive to the heart. This intro isn't packed with as much symbolism or small details as some of the others beyond the obvious Roxas and Sora stuff, but it's still such a spectacle the entire time, and again, so in sync with the music. You could more realistically argue that the lyrics here have more direct relevance to Kingdom Hearts, though I think it's purposefully vague and not from any one character's point of view, more like a general exploration of common themes in the game. But as an entire package, it feels more planned and deliberate than any of the others and definitely had me hyped to play the game. Like, even though I'd played 1 way more than 2, my memories of this intro have always been more clear and remembered more fondly. You should really go watch it with the music after this. Like, you probably forgot how good it is if you haven't seen it in a while. It's much better enjoyed when viewing it than having it explained and hyped up by a dork on the internet. Hey, hope you enjoyed that one. It's an idea I've had for like a year now, so I figured I might as well do it. I had fun with it, so yeah. After I finished writing that script and started editing it, I actually did a community post asking you guys what your favorite intro was. I would have done a poll, but there's only 5 slots on those, so I just did, like, you know, leave a comment. For people who, like, definitively left, like, this is my favorite, I tallied up all the results, so I have the... No, wait. I have the results here. KH2 won, not too surprised by that. Seems like the audience is agreeing with me there. You know, pretty in line with my top 4 almost. I think people legitimately forgot about 0.2. That's a really good one. You should go and watch that if you haven't seen it in a while. But yeah, that about checks out. You know the drill. Twitter, Discord, Twitch, Patreon, those are the big ones. Check them all out. That's where all my stuff is. If you want to support the channel, there's ways to do that through all that stuff. Thank you so much for your continued support as we near 2 years of the regular Pat channel. That's August 31st we're coming up on. It's hard to believe it's been that long already, but I am just having a blast, and it's all thanks to you lovely folks out there. Have a good one, take it easy, and I'll see you next time.